Well, it's Thursday, it's February 24th, 2022. I'm Andy Johnson. Good morning, welcome to it. Here's how we start this morning's program, AM Prime. We'll tell you what's coming down the pike. Of course, we'll take you around the region. We'll stop in Jamaica and in Guyana, that if time permits. Also, we're talking with Dr. Jennifer Rouse in the second hour of the program. We'll continue a discussion with her about social security in Trinidad and Tobago, given the discussions going on about what to do with the national insurance scheme, as well as should people be made to work longer, particularly in the public service, so that there's money in the coffers for people after they retire. That's a big issue, a big debate taking place in the country as we speak. We'll go through there. Also, we're talking with Independent Senator Paul Richards and hopefully the President of the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago, Ira Mathur. There's discussion in the Parliament about the sharing of images and who's compromised and who's at risk with what is shared and what is picked up. We will discuss that matter to the extent that we can get through to it with them. But right now, in the Zoom with us, Dr. Denise Soifat-Angus. Of course, she's the leader of the Innovative Democratic Alliance, the party in Tobago. She's also an experienced public health person. She worked in the public health sector for a number of years, and she's still there in some capacity. She's agreed to talk with us about her reading thus far of the report by the Simangal team into circumstances surrounding COVID in our midst and the attempts by the authorities to address it. She says she's got through a good portion of the report, and she's agreed to talk with us about what she's found out thus far. There are lots of discussions of it on it. Let me just say that we will try and get a sense of how to respond to the suggestion by former Minister Dr. Tim Gopi Singh. He says that a criminal inquiry is necessary given how he has read the report. Dr. Soifat-Angus, thank you very much for agreeing to talk with us on this.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Let me just make one correction. I'm not part of the public health system. I am a medical doctor, practicing medical doctor who has chaired the TRHA in the past.
Right.
And
wait, did you not work?
I want to begin by commending the Professor Simangal and his team for the extensive work that they attempted to do in 1 month. And I also want to applaud them for the fact that they didn't buckle to the pressure of attempting to do this in 1 week. Because even with the work they did in 1 month was not enough. Touching 25 cases per RHA, I don't think is enough of an assessment to give us a true picture and the details of what is needed, but more importantly, the systems that need to be overhauled and reset in terms of going forward. We could see now that pandemics are part of our lives, and we've had a number of them, and this is not going to be the last one. And therefore, how do we better prepare ourselves for the next? I think one of the areas that came out most significantly was that area of chronic non-communicable diseases, where obesity ranked at the top of the list, followed by hypertension and also diabetes as comorbidities. And it is unfortunate because these are what we call lifestyle diseases with insistence and with significant support on changes. We can see the population change those statistics and live better lives. I have always said, with the activity we have seen around the pandemic, why can't we see similar activity around the way we deal with our chronic diseases on the island? And so I really want to commend the team. It is quite an extensive and detailed document that they provided, but I do believe that they need an additional 2 to 3 months to really get to the crux of the matter and to do a more detailed assessment.
Right. You think that's a real possibility? Because, so it was highly unrealistic in the first place to have appointed the team and asked them to come back in a week, and they asked for 4 weeks more,
Absolutely.
so 5 weeks, and they're saying that
Absolutely. There was a total lack of understanding of the medical system and what it entails to have asked them to do this in a week. And so I am happy that they stood their ground and respectfully made the request for a month. But I'm still saying a month was not long enough.
Yeah.
And I also have concerns that, they were able to visit everywhere else and they did not, for whatever reason, they did not visit the facilities in Tobago. If you are to assess a system, as best as possible, you need to assess them with the same standards available. And therefore, if you've visited all of them as physical visits, then Tobago ought to have had that physical visit also.
All right, tell me where I may have been, where I put the emphasis wrongly. My understanding, and just from my own response to the appointment of the committee, was that it was appointed at a period when the deaths were such that it became a critical factor in it. My feeling then was that the report, whatever was written about it, and its sort of terms of reference, was to find out what may have been the reason for the death figure. It was pushing on 8,000 at the time. Was one wrong to assume that they would come back and say, well, this is what was causing it? And did they do that?
I think as best as it could, yes. But we have to know that there are many factors that could contribute to the deaths. It was a new virus to us. We didn't have all the information at the time. And, again, it seems to have been complicated by comorbidities of obesity hitting the top of the list, hypertension, diabetes. But at the same time, were they able to get enough information from 25 cases? Additionally, there were many others who took care of themselves at home, but they could not tap into that information in terms of assessing how people took care of themselves at home, what extras did they do versus, coming into the hospital. And what is telling is that, I think that, them being able to assess how people took care of themselves at home, I think that is a significant key that we should find out about in terms of assisting us with this virus going forward. I know that they briefly mentioned it and that they didn't have time to do it, but I think it's an area that needs to be pursued.
And they talked in one of the reports I'm looking at here in the Express, and they talked about the fact that the committee had challenges accessing data during its investigations and recommended that measures be taken to computerize records. So they found that out. And they say the hallmark of a modern healthcare system is information management, which allows continuous assessment of the effectiveness of the provision of healthcare vis-a-vis national expenditure.
That part is really sad, because I know that I had been part of that healthcare system more than 10 years ago. And that was high on the agenda then in terms of creating electronic medical records. All systems were purchased and, everything done. And I don't know how many times we're going to purchase systems to deal with electronic medical records, getting them off the ground. And still, it is not done. I think we are in the age of, 2022? And that part for me is unforgivable, that we have not been able to put together a system such that the medical records and the data are in such a way that active research and analysis could be done on it.
Yeah,
that has to be priority.
Right, they talked about it was not clear whether there are internal processes at the regional health authorities and the health ministry to address data quality and verification for all the COVID-19 data collected. What's the significance of that? And if you say that in ordinary language, what would people hear?
I think you're looking at, I believe they're looking at audits and your epidemiologist on site. I know that Tobago has one. I don't know if, how many other RHAs have, but I also see coming out of Tobago that even then they did not have data necessarily coming out in a fashion that they felt they should get it. And I think institutions need to recognize that in order to improve patient care, the data is necessary. It's not that someone is attempting to look at you and determine if you intentionally did something wrong, but data is necessary for improving how we go about treating patients, how we go about having a better experience. And so that data is absolutely necessary. And so again, data, it's how you collect it, and there has to be a policy on how data is collected, what data is being collected, and the system or the format in which it is being collected, so it can be read as a standard across the board. And clearly that is an area that was they fell short in.
Yeah, and let's go back to the question of what they found about the prevalence of NCDs among people in Trinidad and Tobago. Are you this term that one got accustomed to? Where people are immunocompromised and people have comorbidities. To what extent did those things affect the number of deaths that we experienced? And what's there was a direct correlation between the high incidence of those things and the people who then succumb to the virus, and that's something that is very critical.
Any situation, health-wise, as long as you have obesity, hypertension, diabetes, that tends to, compromise your situation even further. So I am not surprised at those statistics. And perhaps what we need to take from those statistics is that we need to take a better hand in terms of managing our population and for a better outcome in terms of comorbidities. And one of the areas that I always keep stressing is the fact that we continue to have the cheapest food and subsidize the food that is not really good for us. Why not begin subsidizing healthy food to the market? How do we ensure that people could actually afford healthy food on the market, and perhaps increase the prices of unhealthy food, so you drive people down a particular road? But something has to be done. We have to take a holistic view in terms of how we approach the NCDs, but it is something that it creates a burden on the health sector, and we cannot continue to ignore it. We need stronger systems to address the matter, and not just in the healthcare system, but even how people operate. Because, they're called lifestyle diseases. And if they're called lifestyle diseases, then it means that it's not just in the healthcare system that we need to provide a platform for change, but we need to look at outside of that, how we create a program or programs for sustainable change, beginning with the way of how people can afford to eat.
Right, and the Minister of Health is reported as saying that the report noted and highlighted the issues of short staffing and staff burnout and staff accommodation. Is it unfair to ask whether it needed a report for him, as Minister of Health, to know that?
I think that's standard part of any pandemic that that is immediate information. I don't think the minister would have been surprised hearing that in a report. In fact, I want to begin by I want to commend those persons throughout the health sector for the way they stood up to all of this, because it was indeed quite overwhelming. And I want to thank one of the RHAs in Trinidad. I believe it was Northwest, where I got a call in Tobago asking if I would come down and volunteer for them in Trinidad. Yet I didn't get a call from Tobago. So I think they were a little bit more ahead of the game, understanding what they were dealing with, and they needed extra help, and they got a database of all doctors in Trinidad and Tobago, and they had persons calling to find out, at what points could you come and give some relief. So I think there has to be better management of the resources. In a pandemic, you're supposed to get a database of every single professional on the island, whether it's doctors, nurses, lab technicians, everybody. You have that database, whether they're actively working, not working, retired, whatever. And so you can get persons from within that database to bring assistance to the health sector at any point.
All right, let's come back to again some of the political responses state that. So the minister, Dr. Gopi Singh is calling for a criminal inquiry into what the findings have produced. Do you think that is going too far? Is there any rationale for going there?
I like I said, I think the sample size is too small. I think there was not enough details gleaned from this team, and I don't know who the criminal inquiry would be against. But I think we need to realize that the pandemic has been overwhelming. There have been mistakes which were made. I think the issue with the safe zone, I have always said it. And if you look at the statistics, there was a part where you actually had an increase in deaths from the vaccinated persons versus the unvaccinated in a short period there. And I wonder whether that was a time that the safe zones were brought into space and people felt, okay, well, I'm in a safe zone, I'm vaccinated, I could do anything I want. But safe zones don't protect you from getting the virus. And I think that is one of the areas that we really need to look at, because it has created a burden in many ways. And perhaps what it did was made the unvaccinated more conscious towards self, being responsible for self and safety. And they were less reckless. And you saw that in a small part of that data where you had an increase in infections and deaths in the unvaccinated for a short period. And that was, and that was not so for the unvaccinated. I think that is something that needs to be reviewed.
Right. As you raise the issue of the safe zone concept and to what extent it is in operation, what is your sense? It appears that the government is kind of going slow, at least, if not backing away from this proposal about going to put the law in place to make people vaccinated, or they face certain consequences in their jobs, at least in the public sector. There's a kind of go slow on that, it seems.
Go slow on it. It crosses all types of boundaries and rights. And, it's something they really need to take their foot off the pedal on. So I think we are now seeing that things are getting under control. But again, I think that they could have placed more emphasis on, individual responsibility for health. Many other countries, that is the way they're going to now. They're taking away all their restrictions. And so they need to revisit that. And maybe they have revisited, and that is why they are now go slow with it. Also, once you go down that road, you may find that you're crippling the economy and the sector even further, because you would have to send home many persons who have decided for one reason or the other not to be vaccinated, and it is their choice. Choice is important.
Right. So
you have to support choice.
So here's this quote. Many people around the world would have read the report already and concluded that Trinidad and Tobago had managed the pandemic well. Those are the words of the Minister of Health. Do you agree with that?
We made significant mistakes throughout. It is tough to say, because I think there were a lot of mistakes made. Yes, you could have had more lives lost. Yes, you could have saved more lives. But I think at this point, I really would have appreciated a deeper report coming out of Professor Simangal and his team. before that assessment could be made. But I can't say that, it was all well handled. No, many significant mistakes were made.
Yeah, he goes on to say their conclusions are that we have done very well for a small country with limited resources, as opposed to many other countries who are currently still treating patients in car parks. We were never at that stage.
Should we measure ourselves by other countries or by brothers and sisters across the Caribbean? Because if we measure ourselves with brothers and sisters across the Caribbean and the amount of resources we had starting out versus what they had and how they were able to manage themselves versus how we managed ourselves, I think we would see that we didn't do as well. And so that you don't measure yourselves by the bigger countries where, larger population size and larger resources, but you measure yourself by your brothers and sisters across the region and who continued to, to live in terms of the economy. And whereas the Trinidad and Tobago economy was shut down significantly, and we still had larger numbers, much larger numbers, in terms of being affected than those from the other Caribbean islands.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Denise Joyfat-Angus.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We will take a break. When we come back, we share with you the numbers about this phenomenon we've been talking about in this last half hour. Stay with us. This is AM Prime on this Thursday morning.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this is a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the content capital.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back. Well, up ahead on the program, a discussion with my friends and colleagues, Ira Mathur, who's the president of the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and Paul Richards, who's an independent senator. He's much more than that. He's been somebody who's been very experienced in radio, in television, and in social media. We're talking about the matter which was in the Parliament a couple of weeks ago, the question of, let me just take the headline from the Express, the most recent story on it in yesterday's Express. Filming for shaming can cause trouble for watchdogs. So that's a matter that was addressed in the Parliament a couple of days ago. It's very live. We're talking about it. We'll give you some specifics about what the discussion was framed around. But before we go there, let's look at the COVID-19 numbers in our midst on this day in Trinidad and Tobago's history. Focus on COVID-19, the number of patients totally recovered. That number is now 100,620. The number of total positive active cases, 20,994. The death toll, as we speak, these are numbers which were compiled at the end of the day yesterday, 3,596. 125,210. That's the total positive cases which were reported in the country since we began the counting on March 12, 2020 to yesterday. 722. The new positive cases reported in the 24 hours up to the end of yesterday. And the number of persons in hospitals across the country being treated for the virus and its associationships, 318. And that's continuing to be a source of some relief, both in the general public and for the people in the healthcare system. 318, the number keeps going down all the time. And that's good news, at least from that angle. All right, so we get to the Newsday poll, and the question is, do you think the police are taking seriously enough reports of animal abuse? Let's just tell you what some of those responses are. One person is saying here, they're not even taking child abuse serious, far more for animals. A second response, people are worried about animal abuse. I'm worried about people abuse. Yes, the man killed the dog. I love dogs, but let's be real. A man and woman, child dying out there, police have murders to solve. So in my opinion, humans are higher on the list right now. Another response, there should be a separate unit to tackle animal abuses. Abuse to man, woman, and child should take priority over everything else. And the final response, no, absolutely not. Got my big rots poisoned, reported threats prior to incident, but this was not taken seriously. 1 week after, they both were dead. Retribution comes sad to say a few months after karma struck. So those are the responses to the question. Do you think police are taking seriously enough reports of animal abuse in Trinidad and Tobago? So we move now to our discussion with these eminent personalities. Ira Mathur, president of the Media Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and independent senator Paul Richards, a very experienced hand at radio, television, and social media. I don't know many people who have been able to master those three genres of the business as much as he has. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Andy. I don't know that mastering would be it's appropriate.
Well,
I have dabbled, yes.
That's your modesty.
Good morning.
That's
nice having you.
Good to have you all. Well, let's get to this matter. Let's zero in on, I think, what sticks with me from reading the stuff on it. Somebody was talking about, well, the separation of who is media and who is not, and whose job is legitimately to sort of publicize these things that were the cause of this debate in the Senate. Let's start with you, Ira. I think I saw, was it Opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal was raising that question? How do we determine who is a media person now and who isn't, and who has some kind of a, if not a right, but some kind of a ground on which to sort of popularize what we're saying, what we're looking at with this concern?
Andy, I think that's a very good question. And I think what's happened in recent times, and we've all acknowledged it, is that the world has moved into the digital age. And with it, you have citizen journalists. So everybody's been a journalist. And what we've seen as a result actually has been the most, I think, in the history of maybe the last 300 years, we've never seen so much disinformation around the world. And this is partially because of what has happened, the explosion in digital media. It's also a brilliant thing, right? So that we can see a war being covered live. We can hear, we know right now what's happening almost blow by blow if you go into particular blogs in the Ukraine. So it's got its wonderful side, but it's got a very, very dangerous underbelly. And that's what we are seeing both. What the Media Association has been trying to do in the last few months is to bring our people, is to kind of inform our people more about the digital age, and many of our journalists have already entered it. Now, the question of what is a journalist is extremely important, and perhaps more important now than ever. If you think about medicine, right? Medicine is a vocation very similar to journalism. But I think journalism is a little bit more similar to law in that there's been precedents throughout perhaps the last 200 years or more of what makes a journalist. And this is what we would like people to realize. A journalist is not a blogger. We are not a PR agency, and we are not there to spread disinformation. As you've seen in Ukraine right now, you're seeing massive disinformation, and that is not a journalist. Just because you have a platform doesn't make you a journalist. So what makes you a journalist? And we can look at it almost in legal terms. What are the surrounding circumstances? Remember that a journalist is somebody who is it's almost in our DNA. It's passed on through generations of editors. We are bound to tell the truth. We are bound to be objective. We are bound to show both sides of the story. We are bound to be the voice of the people. We are bound to show sources, very, very credible sources. So if you look at it's very difficult and indeed almost dangerous for us to actually come out and do a code of, to say this is a journalist and this is not a journalist, because the digital age is moving so quickly. But what's not moving and what will always stay the same, Andy, is that the fundamentals of what it is to be a journalist. You know it, I know it. Paul, who I've worked with in Radio 610, Paul knows it. And we almost know it intuitively. And that is going to have to evolve as time goes on.
All right. So, Paul, let's get to you then, and because I think you were on that discussion about what the restraints are which are required, and we're talking here about getting stuff in the metaverse, as it were, about this case, as reported in the Express, a woman engaging in sexual activity, people engaging in sexual activity in a car, and somebody filming it and then putting it out there for the rest of us to see. And while she's doing that, I think a child enters the picture, and that child is caught in that.
Absolutely. Good morning again, Andy and Ira, and thanks for having me. This discussion, it's not the first time it's come up in a legislative context. I was a part of the Joint Select Committee for Cybercrime, which didn't see the light of day in terms of becoming a law. But the same issues came up because the Media Association and the TTPB, rightly and commendably so, asked for parts or clauses of the law to include protection for journalistic practice, because as we all know, the Fourth Estate is extremely important and enshrined in our Constitution and is protected. And it was very difficult, if not impossible, during that JSC to come up with a definition that would protect journalists, but also be wide enough to include the evolution of the practice in some ways in a formal sense. As Ira rightly pointed out, technology has moved ahead of our definitions. and that is the challenge here. But really and truly, I don't see an issue, because as Ira rightly said, we all know what a journalist is. We all know what a journalist is not, and we keep mistaking journalism for persons who are. And there are some people who overlap, who are subsets of it. But we keep mistaking persons who are just blogging and not necessarily calling themselves journalists. They don't want to be called journalists, they're bloggers, because they put out opinion pieces, they gather information, they don't necessarily verify the information, they don't necessarily hold themselves to a get 3 sources or 2 sources standard that journalists are bound by. They don't necessarily feel the need to verify the information as factual, but they feel they are disseminating information and data in their own way and to their own audience. And we all know technically what a journalist is and what a journalist does. The situation in Trinidad and Tobago is that we tend to conflate the roles people are taking in society and the roles people are taking, as they have the right to do with the evolution of social media, to tell their own piece. But I think we all are very clear on what journalism is, as you rightly said.
Right.
And we need to, as the Media Association and the TTPBA, to continue to champion what we know as journalism.
Right. You think it problem began to emerge when Era used the term a while ago. We sort of more and more begin to accept this term, citizen journalism and citizen journalists.
Exactly, precisely. It's like fake news. News is news. News can't be fake news.
Yes.
The juxtaposition of these words that have become pop culture accepted should not be accepted. A journalist is a journalist. There are some bloggers who actually stick to journalistic mandates. There's some who do opinion pieces online, but it's not journalism, as I know it.
Right.
Anyway.
And a journalist, is somebody who works for an organization that sort of honors what the profession is about, and you have standards, you have rules and regulations, and your work has to pass muster with somebody or some set of people before it gets out there, whether it's on radio, television, or in the newspapers. In a lot of cases, that is not happening. You have agencies in the country who purport to be and sell themselves as real media, because they're saying that what is regulated is not real media. You could put anything out there because this is what you feel. And in fact, it has huge audiences. And
I could ask a simple question here, Andy, and Era.
Yeah.
What you're doing now, Andy, what Era has done, what journalists do, can journalists be held legally accountable, and media houses, legitimate media houses, are held legally accountable for what they publish or broadcast?
Precisely.
And that's a big point that we need to emphasize.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of what's happening now, and Andy, you spoke about a journalist being somebody who is accountable to a particular media house. Now think about what's happening with journalism today. You do have excellent journalists who have blogs and who actually operate brilliantly and within all the strictures of what it means to be a journalist, right? So that's where the blurred lines are coming in. And people in general, and maybe this is our fault, we haven't told people this is an opinion piece, and that means it's that person's opinion. This is a feature. This is a news story, and all the different aspects of what it means to be a journalist. But I think that what's happening now, and it's very sadly, if you even look in America, soon newspapers, and I said it here, will not be actually very relevant. Organizations will not be relevant. COVID has begun to kill journalism in a kind of way. The advertisers are not there. It's people who own media companies are finding it increasingly difficult to, I suppose, make to understand what their bottom line is, to make profits. But this is where I really want to appeal, especially now, to media owners and people who pay journalists and allow independent news to carry on, is that you are not the same as perhaps running a soft drink factory. You are not the same as maybe manufacturing cans of tomatoes. You are part of the fourth estate, which upholds which actually is an extremely important pillar of democracy. So I think what right now journalism really needs is support from media owners, from civic citizens, because just imagine what would have happened. I mean, we remember, Andy, what happened in 1990 when there was a blackout of journalism, of media. And that was a terrifying thing. And this is what journalists keep going every day. It's really, really important for us to now support journalists. And remember that journalists are also under threat, because just in many journalists have died. And it's almost too many to be a coincidence of stress. Journalists really, really need that support right now, Andy. I think that's what's going on.
What you're saying is that you don't think that media houses are supporting their journalists sufficiently?
No, at the risk of annoying people who are my own bosses, I actually don't. I think that journalists need to be paid better. I think journalists need greater training. I think that journalists need to be humanized. Just because you assume that a journalist is on the job on their desk at 3 a.m. producing the morning news, or that they're in their rooms at 2 p.m. in the night making sure that your paper gets the latest edition of whatever developing news story, does not mean that they are not human. What's happening now is that, and I've been personally in contact with many journalists since I've become the head of the Media Association. Journalists are suffering strokes. They are suffering huge amounts of stress. They are finding it hard to pay bills. And during the pandemic, many journalists have lost jobs.
All right, but
and
I don't want to sound.
If you look at our economic landscape at the moment,
right.
without
I don't want to sound insensitive to the issue, right?
That more losses will come, more job losses will come.
I don't want to become. I don't want to sound sort of insensitive to the issue, but people could say that about people in any walk of life, in any profession. I'm saying I just finished talking with Dr. Denise Doyle at Fat Angus on the question of the healthcare vis-a-vis the commissioner that was appointed to look into that, and they're the same kinds of challenges for people working there as well as in other sectors. But the issue is to what extent we have to make a distinction between what is real journalism, given the hardships that we face in doing it, and what other people are seeing as journalism, and the sort of the liberties people are taking to get things out there in the public space that violates all the principles about what should happen before you put stuff out. And we're talking about that in the context of this discussion in the Parliament about how we should respond to these things. Paul?
Well, I think I have a slight disagreement with Ira on the viability of newspapers. I think newspapers will always be here. We'll consume it in a different format. That's all.
Right. I've been saying that.
And there's several media houses that we've known have long-standing 100-year traditions around the world who have made the transitions. And right here, the Express, I think, is doing quite well with their online portal. So it's not a matter of newspapers will go. The printed newspaper as we knew it for decades may not exist in 15, 20, 30 years.
And I've been hearing that for 50 years now.
The Express, the Guardian, the News, they will exist on your phone and in an online digital format. So I have a slight disagreement where that is concerned. I think what needs to happen is that more training, more emphasis from private media houses and the state needs to go into training and making the shift to online so that there's a healthy balance between what we're describing as journalism and the dissemination of legitimate, verified information, because it's in the public interest to have that verified, factual information for their very lives. In many cases, we know in Trinidad and Tobago, you reference 1990, if it weren't for journalists in Trinidad and Tobago, we would have actually believed that Abu Bakr took over the country. Journalists kept us informed with what was actually happening. So it was life and death, and that's the situation with journalism around the world. I think we need to have a healthy balance between journalists who uphold the principles of journalism and they're moving to the online cyberspace realm and disseminating that factual information with what the other practitioners, and I'm not diminishing the work of bloggers and other practitioners by any means, but there's a distinction with what they're doing with what journalists do. And some bloggers are actually journalists who uphold, as Andy said, the mandate of journalism. So I just think it's a matter of the traditional media catching up or evolving to the pace where there is a healthy balance of what is out there for consumers.
Right. Let's go back to the discussion in the Parliament now. What do you expect to come out of it, Paul?
Well, I can't comment on that. Standing orders prohibit me from commenting on that, but maybe Ira could comment on that.
Yeah. Ira?
I think that we of course it's an important bill, and in a sense we do, of course, we support it very on broad terms. Nobody'd want to have their photograph, the sexualized photographs out there, and it's a very legitimate bill. The trouble with us and some of the objections that we've had, it's not so much objections, but we are worried that the bill does not sufficiently catch journalists, and even more specifically photographers, and we are worried that photographers could be criminalized under this bill, because if, for instance, a photographer is in possession, say, of, there's several scenarios that I can paint here. So, for instance, if a photographer has photographs of Carnival, and there is nudity there, and can he be criminalized? If a journalist gets hold of photographs from a prostitution ring or child molestation, and a media house publishes some aspect of these photographs to spur authorities to respond appropriately, can be criminalized. Almost, every single newsroom has WhatsApp chats. We're all aware of the woman who went down, was downtown, had a meltdown. She removed all her clothes. There was clearly mental distress there. Maybe what if a journalist takes a shot and shares it on their media chat and says, guys, what do we do with this? How do we handle it? Is that journalist going to be criminalized?
You don't think there's a difference?
My thing is that I think that journalists ought to be, the idea of public interest needs to be broadened, and similar to perhaps police, how they operate, and they're allowed to have certain amount of images during the course of their work. I think that it needs to be broadened to include journalists, and specifically photojournalists.
Yeah, but you don't think that there's a difference between me as a journalist, as a photographer, taking a picture and publishing it on my blog or my facilities, as opposed to submitting it to the editor who makes the decision to publish or not publish, and therefore that person who assumes the responsibility to do that is more at risk than me taking the picture and submitting it, because that's the rule in journalism. None of us produces a product on our own and puts it out there on our own. It has to pass through these filters, whether it's the news editor.
That's the ideal, Andy. That used to be the case for what we would have liked a few years ago. But now consider WhatsApp, right? One photograph, somebody takes a photograph of a woman on the street. She's removed all her clothes. She's in distress, and they send it. They WhatsApp it to somebody, and somebody else WhatsApps it to somebody else.
That's not journalism,
and it goes viral. Is that journalist going to be criminalized?
Well, that's not journalism in my view.
I think to add to that, what you were saying, and it's true, and I could comment on this because it's already in the public domain, is that the way the bill is presently written, it just states, take the photograph or video, store or share, and there is no lacuna for sharing under the circumstances that you have described.
Right, but that's not journalism from how I understand it. You can't take it upon oneself to put things out there and claim to be a journalist. You're putting it out there just like that without any restraints, without it passing through any strainers.
And that's the $1 million question, Andy. Who gets to do that and who doesn't?
And I think, Andy, that's where the excellent journalism does come into place, and a lot of self-regulation is required here. But similarly, I think that something that's done unwittingly, say a photographer is in the middle of Carnival, does the law take into context our festivals and and the fact that a lot of women and men are very unclothed in the festivals? Yeah. And I did make the point that what you would see on a bank at 10 a.m. in any regular morning is not the same as what you'd see in Juve at 8 on a Juve morning. So I think that the law needs to be broadened to catch that aspect of journalism, and also perhaps that could be solved by saying journalists in their line of duty should not be criminalized for, as Paul said, for having these photographs, for taking them or for receiving them. Am I right?
It came up several times, and persons in public spaces, I don't think are expected to have those protections, because if you're in public space and a photograph is taken of you, you're in the public space. But I think what Ira is suggesting is noteworthy, but the only thing when you're making law, you would have to define journalist.
Yeah.
Because it appears in the law.
Right, and where it's journalism and where it's not, what
Exactly.
qualifies and what doesn't qualify. But I want to thank you both. We have to wrap it up at this point. We have to go to the news at 7 o'clock. Thanks to you, Ira. Thanks to you, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andy.
All the best. Be safe.
Thank you. Bye, Paul.
You too. All right, we take a break. We have the news at 7. After that, we continue our discussion with Dr. Jennifer Rouse on what to do about the social security structures in the country. As we get older and older, a larger percentage of the population gets older and older, and it puts some strain on how we take care of ourselves, counting myself in there. Stay with us.
Seven is out, all day is in. WESN News on the hour.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Green Dot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 17, B-Mobile 107, Digital 21, ICN TT 105, and Flow 110. Connect with us at WESNCC or stream online at www.wesncc.com. WESN, your premier platform for Caribbean content.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Psyched. Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. only on WESN, Content Capital.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix-It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix-It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
If you live with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 and has to self-isolate at home, take care of them from a distance and reduce their movement around the house. Give them space, a designated space, and open those windows. If you have to be in contact, mask up, both of you. If you work, stay home from work and don't go out, not even to the grocery or pharmacy. And remember, no visitors allowed. Limit the contact to limit the spread.
The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to the program. Well, up ahead on this morning's edition, we're going to talk where are we demographically speaking. We continue our discussion with gerontologist Dr. Jennifer Rouse. We get to that in a moment. Let's take a quick look around the region. We start in Jamaica. The Minister of Foreign Trade, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, was talking about some things they're having to do with Jamaicans in Dubai. Let's take a look at that.
Jamaica is open for business and investment. This was the message delivered by Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, over the weekend, as she joined with Minister of Tourism Edmund Bartlett and other officials in participating in various activities at Expo 2020 in Dubai. During a media interview at the World Expo, Senator Johnson-Smith emphasized Jamaica's interest in exploring economic opportunities with the United Arab Emirates, including looking at the feasibility of expanding airlift.
So we have had a positive discussion with the Emirates Group about increasing connectivity between the two regions, and we look forward to pursuing those more intensively in the future. But we're also looking at logistics, we're looking at light manufacturing, we're looking at special economic zone participation, and these are all areas which we think can benefit both countries.
For the benefit of potential investors, Senator Johnson-Smith also outlined some benefits of doing business with Jamaica.
Did you know that we have the 7th largest natural harbor in the world? Did you know we have 400 flights a week from 40 airlines? We're connected to 220 gateways in the USA alone. We are the aviation hub between North and South America and have shipping connectivity to all international lines. Logistically, we are the place to be. We're building out warehouse capacity. We have free trade arrangements with the US and with the South American countries such as Colombia and Central and Costa Rica. There's so much business to be done. So you can come and look beyond the beach and do business in Jamaica. That's the message we're bringing at Expo.
2 years into the global pandemic, the Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade Minister says Jamaica was pleased to be selected to host the 8th Annual International Conference and Exhibition, the AICE, from June 13 to June 17 in Montego Bay.
That conference is going to bring together policymakers, private sector, free zone organizations, free zone operators, and it's going to look at how we as a world leverage free zones and special economic zones for recovery. The world is in recovery mode, and as we have had, many business-to-business exchanges while here in Dubai, we're all of the mindset that there's not a moment to lose. We've lost 2 years of economic activity, so we have to find those opportunities now. And that conference in June is going to be one of the places at which the world comes together to determine how we bounce back.
All right, so let's come down to Guyana now, where family members and authorities are looking for 3 fishermen who are out there somewhere after their boat capsized in a part of the waters around the country. Let's take a look at that.
The Noble House Seafood Company could face possible sanctions as the search continues tonight for 3 of its fishermen who have been missing at sea since Saturday after they were thrown overboard as their fishing vessel encountered mechanical and other failures. Although the captain of the vessel called in the distress signal 18 miles off the coast of Maikoni, the Noble House Seafood Company never informed the authorities. Some of the emergency response agencies only became aware of the tragedy at sea after the media started reporting on the issue yesterday. Those missing and feared dead have been identified as 45-year-old Harold Anthony Damon, 78-year-old Ronald Burton, and 46-year-old Winston Sam. A fourth fisherman was rescued on Saturday by a nearby vessel. All four of the men were attached to the Noble House Seafoods Company. During a press conference today, Minister of Home Affairs Robeson Ben said the authorities were left in the dark for more than 24 hours after the tragedy.
Our understanding is that there was no information passed on to the lighthouse or Maran at the time of the incident. So it was approximately 24 hours before there was any official knowledge of the incident.
The fishing vessel World Friend 307 started to sink on Saturday morning and flipped over, throwing the captain and the other fishermen overboard after water was spotted rushing into the engine room of the vessel. The fisherman who was rescued told police investigators that the captain sent out distress signals and made radio contact with his company moments before the boat flipped over. The fisherman also told investigators that several mobile calls were made to the company, but there was no immediate help offered. The government has since moved to establish an inquiry committee to probe the incident. The Home Affairs Minister said there are serious questions that must be answered.
So there are questions to be asked with the owner of the vessel, Noble House. They had, it is said, two trawlers, I think, nearby afterwards sometime yesterday morning. But up to that time, there was no report of any finding in respect of the other three crew members.
The director of the Maritime Administration Department, Stephen Thomas, said the inquiry will have several issues to examine related to the company and its emergency response and its failure to notify the authorities.
Well, perhaps the various sanctions are available, but I think as ministers mentioned, there's this board of inquiry, and maybe they would look at that among other things, I would imagine.
The Board of Inquiry has brought together a number of government agencies, including the Ministry of Public Works, the Maritime Administration Department, and the Guyana Defence Force Coast Guard. The Ministry of Public Works, which overlooks the Maritime Department, has assured that all available resources of the state are being used to aid the search efforts.
All right, so come now to the continuation of the discussion with gerontologist Dr. Jennifer Rouse. We began the discussion last week talking about the situation which we find ourselves as a people. More of us are in that bracket, in the exit doors, as they call them, the exit chamber, than those who are coming in, those who are participating in the system. And the question is, what do we do about it? More people are at retirement age or over that. There have been these headaches over what to do about national insurance, what to do about the age of retirement. Should people stay working longer? At least in the public sector, they're talking about that, making people go up to 65 instead of 60 in their arguments on both sides of that. Dr. Rouse, good morning. Welcome back to the discussion.
Pleasant morning to you and to our viewers. Thank you.
All right, just before we go further, I think we have a few clips from our previous discussion. Let's just get a sense of, let's take us back there, some of what you were saying then.
This is something that is in the Caribbean region, where research has shown that most of our pensioners, their main source of income is their pension. And they don't have auxiliary things. But what has, I think, triggered this discussion, even at the Senate, is the last actuarial report, as the 10th report that was done recently, which we heard again last week in the media, that we have to look at how sustainable is NIS and to us who are now pensioners. And one thing we have to understand, Andy, is that because of population aging, because we are living longer, our post-retirement years are now longer than the years we worked. I want that to sink in a little.
Yes.
So that if you thought that you worked for 45 years or 42, going in at 18, let's say, and working until you are 60 or 65 in private sector and some company, You could easily be a centenarian.
Oh, sort of speaking up from there, my question, with all the discussion, so it went into Parliament because the independent senator, Richard Unirine, made that point. We have to do something, and we've been saying that for quite some time. Let me just start by asking you, whether you think what is required? There's discussions about what to do about the national insurance scheme, whether we should be putting more into it. Where do we go? Where do we start?
Now, what is being the language spoken by governments globally? Because this is not a Trinidad and Tobago problem.
Yeah.
And I will use that up front. This is global. The world is aging because of the life expectancy. All have risen across the board. What we have to always understand, Andy, persons have to now take personal responsibility, because this heavy reliance on the government is going to be not like how we had it. And that's why they call the baby boomers the most spoiled and privileged cohort that has existed to date. And so there was this expectancy. And, we also have in the region patronage and affiliations to your political party and such. And so there's also that other part to it, because I listened yesterday to Mr. Ramey from the trade union, saying that just increasing the age, incremental or otherwise, is not going to be the panacea that is going to solve this issue. It requires more than that. And he also did mention, of course, being a trade unionist, he would be more on the political interference, was his word, to be exact, in quoting, and how it is because of maybe random increments over the years on the senior citizens grant, which used to be called old age pension, that caused it almost forced the NIS or the NIB to have to match it by going to 3,000. And that at the time was when the baseline of the senior citizens pension or grant was 3,000. Otherwise, what had happened is persons who were contributing to the NIS as a contributory fund were finding themselves getting a lower quantum when time for their retirement than the old age pensioners who never worked. Especially those who didn't work, or whether they were weekly or hourly paid. And that was what caused now the NIB to up the ante and equalize. Now, that was not the first time that had happened, but not in that way. Since in 1997, the Bacon Woodrow D'Souza, which is auditors, and they have their actuaries in there as well, they were at the time lobbying for pension reform, because the phrase that was used then was the poverty trap between employees of the government who were public servants monthly paid in a non-contributory fund all the same. But when they did the computation, using what actuaries use as a factor to do the formula, one for females, one for males, and they were finding that when the computations were done at that time for the pensions, it was lower than what the old age pension was. Because as you would know, if you recall, like every so often, the pensions were just arbitrarily raised by 500 or 1,000. And what I'm saying, it never raised by 1,000. Most times it was 500. And that question arose in the Ministry of Social Development at the time. It wasn't called what it is now. And the Division of Aging was still young because it was established in 2003. And I remember having that discussion with the then Director of Social Welfare, which handles now the grants and the pension. And at that time, it was called old age pension. And I remember the director speaking, and he said, we had a pensioner that came in to the office and asked, how is it that we arrived at the quantum? And he realized that there was no formula in the truest sense to justify how come 3,000? How come 3,005? And the discussion we had then was that maybe we need to look at coming into being of a human quality of life index, where you could peg or tag why and justify why 3,005 is sufficient. Because there is, and this is another thing that pensioners have to understand. Pension, whether from a contributory fund or a non-contributory fund, is not a salary. So even if you had worked in your glorious days for 8,000 gross and whatever your net take home was, that quantum is not going to be your pension. So it means that the quality of life that you enjoyed when you were as an employee of whatever firm, you have to either scale it down to meet what your pension should be, if that will be your only form of income, or you prepare. And the preparation was what we were speaking of in the last one, when we said, according to the financial planner, you need to have between 5 to 7 streams of revenue coming in if you want to continue to live at the quality of life that you have now come accustomed to. And that would entail, and we started counting, well, the 3 that we know of, the NIS, the pension, and then you have a medical plan, and we're going up the chain. One of the other things is a credit union. These are things that they're generating income, and an anomaly that is happening in some of the credit unions, because I had to speak at a breakfast morning with one of them, where the older people, especially the retirees, were no longer borrowing in the way that they should be, because a credit union is sustained by the interest that is acquired from the loans. But you have to understand that the ethos that we came out of, our parents told us, do not ever be in debt. You remember how that they used to drum that into your head. So you are looking at the fact, well, my mortgage is finished at 60 and all my expenses are finished. So my income of this pension is now for me to use in my running costs and so. But you can take a personal loan. It doesn't have to be a grand loan, but you will be sustaining the credit union while you are sustaining your life and keeping yourself in a good quality of care. And we spoke about self-care. So beside the annuity, which we had mentioned last week, as a stream of coming in, and you have the investment for those who have a bigger income, but not all can do that. But you have the medical plan, you have the credit union, you have unit trust. Don't forget that. It could be $20 a week or $20 a month that you put, but it generates income and you can access it when you can. Because just thinking lofty about credit cards and all these things, that's not a saving. We're looking at how are we going to be getting money that can be accessible to us in our later years. So that's where the personal responsibility has to come in. And I'm hoping that when I'm speaking this speak, that this is not geared or targeting just those who are 50 and over. This has to be inculcated into the psyche of the millennials, the ones who are joining the workforce from the age of 18 or 20. And that too, we are not seeing an inflow into the public service in the same numbers that when we were 18. Because now we are in a world of contract work. And the millennials are not us. They are not looking for a long service award that they were in an entity or an agency for 20 years. No, it has been shown in the research that once you are in a job, 7 years, and you have not retooled, re-engineered, upgraded yourself, you're redundant. So with that, together with the fact that contract work is contract work, it shows immediately where the whole world of work has changed from what we knew it to be, where we said the public service is one of stability, job security, long service awards. That now is not the millennials' world. They are in a world of instant, and their relations are transactional, not ours. So when they are going into job hunting and jobs, they are like starting on the premise, what's in this for me? They may start in this job, and while in the first month or two or in the first year, they are already surfing the net to see where another similar job will be paying more, and location doesn't matter to them because they are not tethered to territory. They are tethered to the journey.
Right, but
therefore they are very mobile.
Yeah, when they get these contracts, at the end of the contract, they get some kind of a gratuity and so on.
Correct.
You're saying that should be taken into account, and they should know that you have to put that aside for later on.
That's where the education has to come in, because somebody has to let them know, because their world is not planning for long years after. They have to be told this. They have to be educated, and that's why even in the ministry before, some years before I left, when we started having the retirement planning seminars for those who were 55 and over, and I noticed how sad and depressed some of them were when they heard what they should have done, what they could have done, if they knew. They didn't know. Our parents never had retirement planning. They just knew to save a rainy day, and they had building and loan and all these. And another thing too, and another area that we have to look at to consider bumping up is friendly societies, because that was to be there for 25% of our population.
We still have any more
every
of those?
household, 1 in every 4, that means, was in a friendly society.
We still have
and
any more of
that
those?
came out of the slaves.
We still have any more of those? Because I remember my grandmother had a
Again, we're not
card.
even hearing the name because it's under the Ministry of Labor. And at the end of each year, they get dividends. It was out of friendly societies, Andy, that our parents got our school uniform, books. They renovated their houses. It was out of friendly societies and credit and Susu.
I know.
But these have gone on and advanced.
My grandmother, the most anxiety that I've seen her with is when she couldn't find her society card. She didn't know where she put it down. And stuff like that.
Exactly. So you are asking the right questions, where now you have to understand the role of the parents. To show frugality, this set of affluence and opulence at times where, you have to have certain things that at the end of our life, we have to leave. So it is about prudence. It is about frugality, because the environment has shocks in it that we are experiencing far less them. And I've always said I am not although I'm labeled the aging lady, because I'm dealing with the issues that are affecting the aged. That is just one of the target groups. The other end of the spectrum are the youth who are coming in. So like in Germany, because I have a colleague who is German and who works with ECLAC. And she told me, and this was many years ago, over 10 years ago, they started with their young people from the time they started to work at the age of 18. 5%, like how we have the health surcharge, a 5% deduction was made towards your retirement, because not everybody has oil and gas and some monocrop that they can rely on of a government. Personal responsibility starts with not just being mother and father, but parents, where you could not only show and teach and educate the children on how they save, but you have to model it. To let them know now that you are old, because they see us old as the age of 40, but now that you are going out now into your 60s, they are seeing how you are managing your bills. They are seeing a sense of responsibility, that the flow or whichever cable is not just going to flow because it has a cost, and that everything has a cost to it. So if the retirement age, and that too could be discussed when they come into that area now of concern, because the climate has changed, as we know, with climate change. So many shocks are in the environment, and with the technology, so many things become obsolescent. And obsolescence is now factored into even the products that are being made. They are not being made to be sustaining for all time. Your car will run the same way after 10 and 15 years. No.
All right.
Depreciation is built in so that you have to keep spending. So you have to know how to design your template for retirement
Right.
with all these factors being considered.
So you think
It's
that
a
those
shock.
things are right. So those things are even more important than where I wanted to go to talk about what must be done with the NIS and what must be done with taxation and so on. But we have to leave that for another time because what you said here comes down to.
I'm getting an echo from
Yeah,
you,
sorry about
Andy,
that.
and as a result, I'm not hearing you
Yeah.
very clearly. So I have to pay much attention to what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, well, I was trying to wrap it up to
Oh,
say
it's
that
good now. It's good.
right, a lot of what you're saying there falls under what Kelvin Schoon will call, he has these initials IUTM. It's up to me. I said I was thinking about getting to where we have some consideration as to what should happen with the national insurance scheme, whether they should spend more, whether people should be taxed more, whether some of the the things in which government provides should be cut back. But again, that is going forward. But this discussion, I mean, your focus here has been on where it should be. What it's up to me to address these things about my retirement. So we
Sure. And one last point before we wrap up is that it means too that in terms of still the government, we have to look at what the IMF had proposed since in 2002. Before the division of agent came into being, and had a meeting with the trade unions and other leaders to let them know government needs to consider a contributory plan. How long can they sustain this non-contributory plan with all the monthly paid workers entitled to a pension for life, and only to find that when that came into being, that your pensioners are outliving the very years that they worked.
All right.
So that is something that the government has to consider, whether they can continue with non-contributory. And that would mean, of course, the unions would say, raise the gross. Because if you're going to deduct a 5% for pension contributions, then your gross has to increase.
All right, I think much more to talk about, much more to plan, and this much more effective decision making.
Fertile discussion.
Much more effective decision making has to take place. But thank you very much, Dr. Jennifer Rouse.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Well, that's our broadcast for this morning. We want to thank you for watching, and we tell you, as always, you can stay with us. But no, before we get there, let me just take you out with this. A Slovakian swimmer panicked halfway through a 50-meter dash in an ice-cold lake. Take a look at that. Watch this. What a thing. Well, that will do it for us this morning. We want to thank you for watching. We tell you, as always, you can keep in touch with us here at WESN on all our social media platforms. You can send your emails to amprime@wesncc.com. Well, news at the top of the hour, followed by today's edition of Talking Point with Shah and Small. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.